The file you have before your eyes, General, is a leaked transcription from the Central Directorate of Intelligence GRU, a useless effort by the Western enemy to disguise a cosmic violation under the pathetic title of High Altitude Research Project, or HAARP. Observe the initial date, 1961, the peak of human stupidity, where Canadian and American engineers, led by a madman named Dr. Gerald Bull, conceived the idea of using a naval artillery weapon, archaic and brutal, to interact with the ether. The premise was so ridiculous that the Kremlin initially dismissed it as a propaganda farce to squander resources. We did not understand the depth of their insolence. The historical fact is that it was a static, massive, and grotesque supergun designed to fire projectiles into low orbit. The technical justification that garbage about cost efficiency versus rockets was the perfect alibi for the public and for the civil bureaucracy. The impact analysis, as recorded in our own counterintelligence reports, focused on the useless dispersal of capital. The West was burning millions of dollars to achieve what our missiles accomplished with thermodynamic elegance. But the truth is that the money invested was not for the rocket. It was for the silence about what was really coming out of that tube. Warning, do not relate this project to principles of conventional physics. A concrete example, and the most repugnant, is the initial design of the projectile, the Martlet series. These were not sophisticated rockets. They were aerodynamic shells filled with cheap instrumentation, fired with a naval propellant charge. It is the same stupidity as using a hammer to paint a fresco. The irony is painful. They sought the cosmic vanguard with a technology that reeked of First World War gunpowder. The monster was not the weapon. It was the Western mentality that believes any problem can be solved with an explosion big enough. The stupidity of their engineers was their perfect camouflage. My critique, and this must be recorded in the main file, is that we failed to read the psychic intention behind the project. HAARP did not seek to place objects in space. It sought to pierce the layer that separates us from other things. It sought a violent and one-directional point of contact. The great question that the West did not dare to ask is, what would happen if the celestial vault was solid and they, in their arrogance, violated it with such a primitive tool? The cannon was not the weapon. It was the tip of an infected scalpel with which they cut the skin of the planet. This project is proof that incompetence is sometimes the most effective form of existential terrorism. The location is key. General, they did not choose a Nevada desert for discretion, but the Barbados Test Range high water, established between 1962 and 1967. Why a Caribbean island, a tropical paradise, for an artillery operation of such caliber? The official answer, as insipid as always, was the proximity to the equator, which supposedly facilitated orbital injections. We in the GRU know that this is a thermodynamic lie. Barbados was chosen for its isolation. They needed a place where the transfer could occur without competent witnesses. The most repugnant example of their technical success, our intelligence failures, the firing of the Martlet II, which reached a stratospheric altitude of 180 kilometers. It is not the altitude that matters, it is the sonic cavity it left behind. The 16-inch artillery piece, a metallic monster 40 meters long, became the oscillating pendulum between two realities. The impact of this operation is that the magnitude of the machine was directly proportional to the magnitude of the accident they tried to hide. It was not a miscalculation. It was a violation of planetary protocol on an industrial scale. Warning, the analysis of the Barbados frequency is grounds for summary disposal. The impact analysis, according to our reports, is that every time that tube spat out its load, it generated a geometric distortion in the upper atmosphere that was recorded in our own tracking networks in Siberia. They were not simple shock waves. They were temporal fissures that the atmosphere took hours to seal. The Western idiots were playing at being gods, piercing the firmament with the delicacy of a drunk using a corkscrew. At the worst part, General, is that they believed the projectiles were what mattered. The real problem is that after 1967, the atmosphere at that latitude was no longer the same. It was contaminated. My harshest critique is that Project HAARP was not a failure of engineering. It was a success in opening. The real objective was never to place a cheap satellite. It was to demonstrate that Earth's isolation was a fallacy that could be broken with enough gunpowder. The giant tube in Barbados was a cosmic resonator screaming into the void, and the fundamental law of physics, which these inept fools seem to have forgotten, is that every scream requires a response, and the response, we know from our own files, did not come from an enemy nation. By 1967, Canadian funding for HAARP was abruptly cut. The official justification was inefficiency and lack of immediate practical applications. This is, General, the most repugnant lie in the file. A project of this scale does not stop for cost. It stops because the contamination is uncontrollable. The impact of this cessation of operations was the discreet transfer of the technology and key personnel, including Bull, into the hands of the United States Army. It was a protocol cleanup so that the blame would fall on the civil academic sector before the true catastrophe became public. The most disturbing example of this transfer is the missing telemetry data. Records from our agents at McGill University indicated that during firings that reached extreme altitudes near 180 kilometers, the telemetry readings of the Martlet projectiles showed a frequency discontinuity of several seconds. What does it mean? Not that the transmitter failed. It means that during those seconds, the projectile did not exist in our space-time. The ammunition, the charge, the physical projectile became a vehicle of transit for something more subtle that used the hole created by the gun to enter and exit. The information that returned was not about the projectile. It was about what it found on the other side. Warning: frequency discontinuity is not a software error. The impact analysis for the Kremlin was terrifying. We understood that the official failure was an incompetence cover. The true success of HAARP was its ability to create an interdimensional vulnerability. The projectile was nothing more than a plug for the hole that the Westerners, in their stupidity, had opened. And when funding was cut, it was because the biological frequential material that returned in the casing was too unstable to be contained. The technology was not the weapon. The weapon is the void that technology left behind. My critique focuses on the stupidity of believing that the projectile was the only thing that traveled. The projectile was light. The trauma to space-time was immense. And when the projectile returned, it did not come alone, it came contaminated. The cold metallic casing was the new vessel of a frequency that could not be detected, but that dispersed among technicians and military personnel, initiating a slow psychic adaptation process in the staff who handled the residues. The residues were not ballistic, they were incubation material. The fate of Dr. Gerald Bull, the brain behind HAARP, is proof of the disposal of failed assets. After the cessation of funding, Bull became a scapegoat and a pariah, and in 1972 began a path that would lead him to sell his genius to external actors. The Western leadership not only shut down the project, it ensured that the knowledge of the Barbados hole was scattered in the most uncontrolled and absurd way possible. They left it in the hands of tyrants and unstable regimes Iraq, South Africa. This was not negligence, it was the deliberate metastasis of terror. The most obscene example is Bull's Project Babylon with Iraq, a 1,000mm supergun, a machine so grotesquely large it was almost an architectural mockery. What did Saddam Hussein seek with that monster? Power. But Bull was not selling power. He was selling the ability to fracture. The Kremlin's fear was not that Iraq would launch a cheap satellite. It was the fear of the uncontrolled dispersion of opening technology. The gun was no longer contained in Barbados. Now, multiple points on the planet were vulnerable to the resonant scream. Warning. Drive. Gerald Bull was the first victim of the resonance field. The impact analysis focuses on the paranoia of the KGB. We did not fear the nuclear warhead, we feared the uncontrolled transfer of frequency. When Bull was eventually assassinated in Brussels in 1990, probably by Israeli actors, but that is irrelevant. The motive was not his work on long-range weapons. It was that his mind had become a reservoir of forbidden knowledge about the structure of the void. The leadership needed to silence the anomalous frequency that the HAARP experience had implanted in him. He was not a scientist. He was a biological remnant of the experiment. My critique is that the public narrative ignores that the technology was never the gun. The gun was a resonator. Bull was not an artillery genius. He was an involuntary tuner of interdimensional frequencies. His madness was not megalomania, but the psychic contamination caused by contact with the thing that emerged from the hole. He was not seeking orbit. He was seeking violent communication. And the proof of his success is that until his death, he kept building bigger and bigger guns, trying to seal the crack he himself had opened unsuccessfully. Let's analyze the raw material of horror. The historical fact is that the propellant used was a modified gunpowder, which generated brutal internal pressure. The projectile, a subcaliber. The jargon of military reports speaks of impulse efficiency. We speak of spectral integrity, violation. The gun did not fire, it tore. The darkest example we have is the 1965 anomalies report in the Warsaw Pact's air defense system. Radars on the Czechoslovak and Polish borders recorded massive, non-metallic objects appearing on impossible flight paths, coinciding with the peaks of HAARP's tests. Were they spy planes? No, they were the remnants of friction. They were the entities rearranging themselves after the gun had displaced them. Warning: psychic contamination is a containment protocol. The internal impact analysis that forced the KGB to classify this project as red category danger is the explanation of why HAARP stopped. It wasn't due to a lack of rubles or dollars. It was due to massive contamination of personnel. The technicians operating the weapon in Barbados reported sensory discontinuities, lost time lapses, and the inability to recognize the geometric form of their loved ones. The gun had not failed. It had achieved contact, and that contact was biologically hostile. The control material returning from the ether was physically charged with a frequency that induced madness. My critique focuses on the bureaucratic coldness with which the West handled this psychic disease. The project was halted because the military began to show behavior non-compliant with protocol. The truth is that people were going insane in a systematic way, and the only way to stop the spread was to execute the summary disposal of the technology. The projectile was not the threat, but the cavity it left in the sky, an open hole for spectral influence. The enemy is not a nation. It is the void that now has an entryway. The file closes, General, but the hole remains open. The partial declassification of HAARP documents in the 1990s was another smokescreen. They only confirmed the technical failure and the fiscal waste. This is a mockery, a frozen laugh. Humanity believes that space opens with gunpowder. It is biological arrogance that condemns us. The problem is not that the cannon existed, but that no one knows how to seal the wound. A concrete example, and the reason why you are reading this document, is the persistence of rumors about inactive or reactivated HAARP installations in remote locations Arizona, the Aleutian Islands. The technology is supposedly obsolete. Then why does the paranoia persist? Because the fear of the archive is that geographic contamination is irreversible. They don't need the machine. The hole is already permanently imprinted in the upper atmosphere over Barbados. The artillery only did it the first time. Warning: your ability to discern will be compromised in the next 72 hours. The impact analysis is the most cynical. The final mockery is that, in the end, the HAARP cannon did not attack the Kremlin. It attacked us all. It created a crack in planetary isolation. And now, that crack is the focal point for anything that was displaced by the shots to slowly return through the contaminated atmosphere. The terror is that the military and the scientists did not know what they were doing, and the universe, in its contempt, allowed them to succeed. My final critique is for you, General. By reading this transcript, you have become a contaminated asset. The aesthetic of the ancient archive is not just a visual filter, it is a biological warning. The paper is infected with the same anomalous frequency that destroyed the minds of the technicians in Barbados. The document is a bureaucratic virus that forces you to believe in the stupidity of the West as a cover. The enemy did not launch from space. The enemy was invited in with a 16-inch weapon. The transfer has been confirmed.